clean air. I didn't want clean water. And I didn't want labor unions. And no, no, no. This is a terrible piece of legislation. It should be fixed. There's none of us who would stand up here and say it's a perfect piece of legislation. But I urge my colleagues to vote no.
Gentleman's time's expired. For purposes, the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I would like to yield to my colleague from Georgia, Mr. Gingrey, as much time as you may consume.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the gentleman for yielding. I appreciate the opportunity to respond to my good friend and the good doctor, my colleague from the state of Washington, who made reference to, I think, Groundhog Day. Now, my name, Mr. Chairman, is Phil Gingrey. But as I sit here over the last couple of hours listening to the argument from the other side of the aisle, I feel like Phil Connors. And that was the weatherman. Bill Murray, if you recall, played that role, the weatherman at Pawtuxet, Pennsylvania, covering Groundhog Day. And believe me, we have been listening to Groundhog Day from our colleagues on the other side over and over and over again. And it is indeed getting just a little bit tiring. My friend also said, the gentleman, the doctor from the state of Washington, Mr. Chairman, and I quote him, "I've never seen a Congress that has failed as much as this one." Well, I'm going to tell you, I have never seen a provision of law in a bill that has failed as much as the Class Act. And they can beat this to death, and I think they have done that, Mr. Chairman. But, you know, I have in my hand here a summary sheet of the HHS analysis of the Class Act over an 18-month period of time. And they have tried to model 8 different options to make this fiscally solvent and required by the law. Thank goodness for the amendment from the senator from Rhode Island, the Honorable Judd Gregg, at the time chairman or ranking member of the Budget Committee. And the 8 options, none of them work. I mean, they're things like work requirement, they're things like not allowing anybody with a pre-existing condition to be in the program, allowing people with pre-existing conditions to be in the program, but only eligible for a benefit for 15 years, and on and on and on. And actually, the one option that's not on this printout, I guess, is option number 9. And that would be the option, Mr. Chairman, of requiring every individual to sign up for the long-term program under the Class Act. Now, the question on all of these options was, does the Secretary have legal authority? And in most of the 8, not completely, HHS vulnerable to legal challenge, not completely vulnerable to legal challenge, not completely, again vulnerable, no authority, no authority, no authority, no authority. Well, number 9, individual mandate, making everybody sign up for it. Yes, got the authority to do that. She could have done that, but I'm sure that my colleagues and her advisors and the administration probably, and I state this rhetorically, do you want another mandate to which the American people can rail against us in the next election? And she's smart enough to know that option number 9 was not acceptable. So again, we can go on and on. We can do this for another couple of hours and continue this Groundhog Day ruse. But as I've said earlier, Mr. Chairman, what part of no do they not understand? Now look, when this amendment was added at the last moment back in 2009 by the chairman of the Subcommittee on Health, Mr. Pallone, during the Energy and Commerce Committee debate on the Class Act, Chairman Pallone stated, and I quote him, "I can't stress enough that we are not actually setting this up We are simply suggesting. That was the end of the quote. In fact, Chairman Pallone asserted that the program would not take effect until subsequent legislation was passed. Well, Mr. Barton, who at the time was the ranking member of the overall Committee of Energy and Commerce, said this: well, reclaiming my time, I am going to support the Pallone amendment without binding anybody on my side to support it, with the understanding that if this moves forward, there will be a hearing on this in this committee, and there will be bipartisan efforts to flesh it out. Do I have that assurance from the chairman? And Mr. Pallone responded, you certainly have my assurance. And then the chairman, Henry Waxman, overall chairman of the committee, said, fine with me, but he is the subcommittee chairman. We never had one hearing. We never had an opportunity to flesh it out. Defeat this amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Tennessee's time has expired. For purposes, the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition. Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes. Does the gentlelady seek to request to strike the last word?
I do.
Gentlelady is recognized.
My good friend from Georgia, some things bear repeating. I love February 2nd. It happens to be my daughter Erica's birthday. Some call it Groundhog Day. I call it a day of great celebration for a bit of joy that came into our lives. So it's a day for many that is happy. It's a day that many humorously look forward to great weather. Some remember our good friend Bill Murray, and it is a day that symbolizes repetition. Sometimes the pain of Americans deserves to be repeated over and over again. And I'd like to answer my good friend, not speaking for Mr. Pallone, but in actuality, we have the opportunity now to have bipartisan hearings. Nothing is precluded. And Mr. Pallone's statement was accurate. He was not writing the structure of long-term care. He was indicating that for Americans it was vital. What is disappointing is that my friends on the other side of the aisle are willing to give up so easily. I don't understand that. Where's the American genius? Of course, they will cite HHS. Well, they know that Congress directs HHS. They know that the repeal of this legislation for long-term care will simply kill the opportunity for Americans to find relief. As we look to the future, we are just a month away until taxes go up on middle-class families, and Americans looking for work lose their unemployment insurance, and seniors face losing access to their doctors. We could be working on that, move the conference committee a little faster, but we're now adding an extra burden. Let's repeal the Class Act. It doesn't disturb me that HHS has made several tries and in a time frame has not found a cure yet. But knowing research and knowing science and being near and in the community of the Texas Medical Center, I know how long it takes to get a good answer in health care. But what I do want to stress to my friends, can they deny that 82% of Americans say that taking care of relatives who are aging or ill is demanding? 82% of them say that. 72% indicate that taking care of them is overwhelming. And 56% said that as they are taking care of their sick relatives, they are getting ill. And yet we want to abandon the discussion on long-term care when I've already said on the floor of the House that $450 billion of that long-term care is already in private hands. It's in families. It's through their labor. They are overwhelmed. Only $14 billion is in the private industry sector. See how much they're standing up to the bar. And $101 billion in Medicaid. We have to find a solution that balances benefit and burden. Listen to a constituent from Texas who took care of her son after he was seriously injured in a roadside bombing while patrolling in Iraq. She did not return home for 7 years in order to be with her son. Debbie initially took a leave of absence from her job but ended up resigning to become a full-time caregiver for her son. Because she no longer had a paid job and her husband was the only one working, they had to start using their retirement savings to survive. Her son is now better, great news, and active in the community. And she continues her work, but the catastrophic impact of the family continues on. Rhonda has gone from a part-time visiting caregiver to her elderly parents to live-in full-time caregiver. Even after the death of her own 23-year-old daughter in a car accident and her only brother becoming disabled after an illness, before 2001 she was a full-time working mother of 2. Where is the relief for these humans, these individuals, these people in need? Where it is in the amendment I offered that indicated that it is important to note that long-term care is important, and a study should engender to be able to determine that. But more importantly, let's again look at this in a way that we take our time and look at the macroeconomics and take into consideration how we can best configure this. But let me tell you very clearly that if we repeal this Class Act, the burden will fall on local and state government and the millions of caregivers who already, through their own effort and their own toil, with love, I will tell you with love, expend $450 billion that we don't compensate them for, lose their jobs, raise the deficit, add to the debt because they are not able to take care of themselves. And as we see some 76 million baby boomers, Mr. Speaker, going forward, Mr. Chairman, let me just say, don't repeal this bill. It bears repeating. Help those who need your help. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time's expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Across the United States, anguished families are sitting down at their kitchen table. They're reviewing their financial situation. Many are trying to figure out how in the world they're going to afford their personal long-term care needs or that of a loved one or of another family member. People who've worked hard their whole lives, who are already coping with a sluggish economy, are being crushed under the weight of long-term care costs, depleting their savings and sometimes spending themselves into bankruptcy. As we know, Mr. Chairman, long-term care is not covered in most health care plans. If you're already old and sick, you probably can't qualify for a separate long-term care policy, and if you can, it's likely to be insanely expensive. Medicare pays only for the first 100 days of nursing home care, and Medicaid is only available to the very poor. But you don't have to be poor to be overwhelmed by nursing home costs that average $72,000 a year. We can't forget that we live in an aging society. As our largest generation, the baby boomers move into their retirement years. And while advances in science and technology have thankfully allowed us to live longer, it means that many of us will require more extended, more expensive care. All this has created a perfect storm in which the long-term care crisis will get even worse, not better. In the coming years, Mr. Chairman, we are going to find ourselves in turmoil over long-term care. So why aren't we putting our heads together on both sides of the aisle in coming up with ideas to solve this dilemma? After all, we're all going to be old. Instead, we're here today because the majority appears to want to repeal the one modest attempt to help Americans cope with long-term care costs. If the program needs improvement, I ask them, then let's fix it. That's what taxpayers are paying us to do, not throw up our hands and walk away from this problem. But my friends in the majority, I seem to have a different version and vision of public service. It seems that instead of providing service to the public, they view it as their job to dismantle and disembowel any government investment that improves the lives of regular people. And nothing seems to drive them to distraction like the common sense reforms of the Affordable Care Act. They have no innovative health care ideas of their own. They're simply nostalgic for the cruel and unfair health care system that we have finally begun to leave behind us. So we need to be building on health care reform. We do not need to be whittling away at it. Vote no, my colleagues, on the repeal of the Class Act. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands seek recognition? Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I come to the floor today to speak against this repeal, I cannot help but remember the faces of the individuals with disabilities, individuals with very serious long-term care needs, sitting through the long markup a couple months ago, only to, at the end of the day, see the committee majority vote to repeal the Class Act. And if an expression could convey 1,000 words, theirs did that day. And I know because I had the same expression, and I felt the exact same way, disappointed and frustrated, saddened at the very real possibility that they and our seniors would be left out of the cold when they are at their most vulnerable. I'm sure that they and millions of other people with special needs and seniors are watching this now, and they, like all of us here now, know that repealing the Class Act will not make 10 million Americans' long-term care needs disappear, and it certainly will not make them suddenly affordable for the overwhelming majority of most families. The Secretary did the responsible thing. She put the implementation on hold because the actuarial studies did not show that the program as designed was sustainable. None of us who supported and voted for the Affordable Care Act thought that everything in it was perfect. Much of it was well put together, well planned, well designed. But there were some that we thought might need to be tweaked or even revised in bigger ways. But we needed to take that first big important step in the right direction to make sure that the health care needs of our fellow Americans would be met. The Secretary, in her letter to the Speaker, said that the report reflected, and I quote, the development of information that will ultimately advance the cause of finding affordable and sustainable long-term care options. So what we should be doing is looking at those options, or charging an institute like the Institute of Medicine to look at them and recommend a way forward. Everyone knows that we have a long-term care crisis in the United States. There are 10 million vulnerable men, women, and children who need this care. And we know that over the next decade, that number will grow to 15 million. We also know that there are grave racial, ethnic, as well as geographic disparities that exist across the 10 million Americans with unmet long-term health care needs. And so we also know that long-term care burdens family budgets, as well as Medicaid programs in the states that administer them across our nation. Only about 8% of Americans buy long-term care insurance because the premiums are too expensive in many cases for most individuals to afford. Despite these facts, and these are indeed facts, and as we have seen time and time again, rather than identify and support a medically, economically, and socially responsible solution to this critically important problem, in their zeal to attack the Affordable Care Act and undermine the provisions that have already begun to help all of our constituents, our friends on the other side of the aisle would rather slam that door shut and not continue to work with us to find ways to meet this critical need. We need to have a plan to ensure access to affordable long-term care, and repealing and dismantling the Class Act with no safeguard or stopgap in place first is definitely not the right way to go. I, like everyone here, Republican and Democrat, have 10 million reasons to take a stand and to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, to provide a voice for the voiceless, and to remind our colleagues and those watching that this fight cannot be over and that we cannot stop until our long-term care crisis is addressed, and those who need it, as many of us, Republican and Democrat, will, and it's addressed in a manner that meets the high ideals of this country. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, when it comes to health care and those who need it and can't afford it, I constantly remind myself that but for the grace of God, there go I. If you don't believe in God, but for the grace of chance and circumstance, but for the goodness of luck, there go I. The question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of country are we going to be? Are we going to be a country wherein health care becomes wealth care, where only the wealthy can afford what is available, the technology is available, the pharmaceuticals are available, but only the wealthy can afford that which is available in the richest country in the world? Are we going to be a country wherein pregnancy is a pre-existing condition? If you are pregnant and you don't have insurance, you cannot get it? Is that the kind of country we are going to be? Are we going to be a country wherein senior citizens who are in need of pharmaceuticals cannot get them because they cannot afford them? But if you're wealthy, you can. But for the grace of God, there go I. No one deserves the status in life to which he or she is born. Born wealthy, you didn't earn it. Born poor, you don't deserve it. The question is whether we will understand that it can happen to any one of us, and that we are a country that can afford to make a difference in the lives of those who are sick and cannot take care of themselves. So the issue has not been today whether we can afford it, whether we can do it. The question is, do we have the will? Do we have the will? We can find the way. And I would yield to my colleague from Georgia, whom I have great respect for and whom I hold no animus. I just would like to ask you, is it not true, my dear friend, that we can work this out and find a way to get it done? Is it not true? Can we not find a way to get this done?
The gentleman yielding
yes.
To me. Well, here again, when Mr. Barton, the ranking member of the committee, asked very specifically, Mr. Chairman, when he asked very specifically in the markup on the House side back in 2009, if I vote yes for that, will we have hearings to, I think it was flesh this out. And he was assured, of course, by the chairman at the time of the Health Subcommittee, Mr. Pallone, and also the chairman of the overall committee, Mr. Waxman from California, said, hey, it's okay with me, and no hearings were held. So, you know, this business of can't we work this out, but yet, you know, that we were reaching out and it never happened. So I go back to my friend.
If I may reclaim my time, I do welcome comments about the past, my dear friend, but I'm asking you, given that you do have some degree of influence, given that you're in the majority, why can we not do now what was not done? And I'm not privy to all of what wasn't done and should have been done, but why can we not do now what wasn't done? Why can we not now work to mend rather than end something that can benefit persons who cannot help themselves? Why can we not do it now? What prevents us?
Mr. Chairman, I think the gentleman is yielding to me again and
yes,
asked me a specific question, and I want to respond to my friend. You know, the point I will make to him is that we can work together. We absolutely can. Mr. Chairman, we have discussed this with Mr. Pallone. I have done so personally, as I know my physician colleague on Energy and Commerce, Mr. Burgess, has had a conversation with Mr. Pallone, and we can work together. But we have to remove this failed program first. because of that looming deadline of October the 1st, 2012, where we'll get sued if we don't have a program. So,
Mr. Chairman,
glad to work with the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask my friend, may I address the chair, please? You are the chair. Mr. Chairman, I address you and I ask that I be extended the courtesy that the gentleman from Georgia received when he received an additional 5 minutes. I don't need an additional 5 minutes. I'd just like to continue this dialogue that we have had, and he did receive an additional 5 minutes earlier.
Is the gentleman requesting
unanimous consent
for an additional 5 minutes?
I ask unanimous consent to continue briefly this dialogue with the gentleman.
Point of order,
Gentleman
Mr.
from
Chairman.
Georgia.
In regard to you yielding an additional 5 minutes to me, in fact, that is not true. Mr. Chairman, as you know, the gentleman from Tennessee, Representative Fincher, moved to strike the last word, was afforded the 5 minutes, as we all are, and he yielded to me. So I certainly would oppose to unanimous consent for you to. I don't think you have the authority to do that, quite honestly, and I yield back.
Well, I would ask the chair for a ruling first as to whether the chair has the authority to do it. And then, if I'm incorrect, let the record always reflect that I will extend an apology when I have made a mistake. So if I've made a mistake, I will do so, but I do ask that the chair give a ruling as to whether or not we can have the unanimous consent request granted.
Parliamentary inquiry. Parliamentary inquiry.
First respond to the inquiry from the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair may extend time to gentlemen in the committee of the whole only by unanimous consent.
Now, so I'm prevailing upon my friend.
Could I make an inquiry at this time?
Does the gentleman have an inquiry?
Well, before I leave the podium, if I may, I'd like to prevail upon my friend, whom I'm having a colloquy with, to show
the gentleman from Texas
some sense of a desire to continue this and reach some sort of
the gentleman from Texas will suspend.
Yes, sir.
The gentleman from Texas, his time has expired.
I'm asking for the unanimous
consent.
May I ask for the unanimous consent now, Mr. Chairman?
Has requested unanimous consent to extend his time. There's been an objection to that request.
Well,
will you withdraw your objection?
I don't want to make an objection, but I do make.
From the District of Columbia is recognized.
Is it true that 540 is the end of that there will be no members heard on this issue after 540? I ask the chair.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to have to insist on regular order here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady's question from the gentlelady's parliamentary inquiry is a 3-hour time limit that has not yet been reached. Gentlelady from Illinois, what purpose does gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition? Gentlelady from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, roughly 70% of us at some point are going to have difficulty taking care of ourselves independently, and we're going to need some sort of long-term care or supports. And as the population ages, of course, the need for these services only increases. You know, and I've been listening to this debate, and on the substance, there is, or at least we identify the problem, there's an enormous amount of agreement. We all know that the costs associated with long-term care are very high. Nursing homes can cost over $70,000 a year, and just 20 hours a week of home care costs nearly $20,000 a year. For working families, there's few practical options in order to plan and pay for long-term care and support services. Only about 3% have a private policy covering long-term care, and while the majority are forced to spend their way into poverty to qualify for Medicare, safety net coverage of these costs, are forced to spend their way into poverty. So we know this. We all agree on this. And what the Class Act did was address a number of critical needs, including providing a way for persons with disabilities to remain independent and in their community, and bringing private dollars into the long-term care services system to reduce reliance on Medicaid without impoverishing individuals and their families. And we all agree that the Class Act is far from perfect, but it provides a beginning framework to begin to deal with the problem. I got a letter from Jonathan Lavin, CEO of Age Options in Oak Brook, Illinois, a service provider. He emailed me, actually, to say, please do not vote to repeal the Class Act. Such a vote will reverse the hope of millions of Americans that one day they may collectively insure themselves for the eventuality of a debilitating disability. When we see a young former Congresswoman gunned down and a healthy, vibrant Illinois senator struck by a stroke, we realize that any of us may suffer from a disability. A broad-based, effective insurance program, he writes, will assist those who face such life-altering challenges. We understand why the Class Act is delayed in implementation, since the economic situation is so dire, but we cannot understand deliberately acting to eliminate the potential for such legislation to do so much good after the economy recovers, unquote. Every American faces the reality that an accident or an illness requiring long-term care could devastate them financially. While this issue affects everyone, I want to focus on the importance of the Class Act for women in this country. Long-term care is very much a women's health issue. Women live longer than men. Their life expectancy exceeds those of men by some 5 years. And because they live longer, women are at a greater risk of needing long-term care services to help them when they become disabled or too sick or frail to care for themselves. Women tend to need more resources for long-term care. Women tend to be ill for longer periods of time, and women are less likely to have a family member to care for them. Over 70% of nursing home residents and nearly 2/3 of home care users are women. Because women far more than men take on the role of caregiver, women are the ones who end up staying at home, sometimes giving up careers to provide care for a sick or disabled family member, adults and children alike. Indeed, women make up 3/4 of the home care workforce. Class would help make these challenges easier. It would help provide the care women may require if and when they need long-term care or supports for themselves. It would help provide relief, a break, if you will, for those women who spend all day, every day at home, taking care of others in need of long-term care. To take away this program is to take away the first real opportunity that women of this country have to deal with the long-term care challenges they face day in and day out, both as patients and as caregivers. Like so many other Republican assaults on the Affordable Care Act, H.R. 1173 is in effect an attack on women and women's health. Like all those other assaults, we should push back and reject this one. Class is just one of the many advancements for women's health that is included in the Affordable Care Act. As you heard many times today, let's fix it, not repeal it, so it can work for women and all Americans as intended. Instead of passing H.R. 1173 and repealing the Class Act with no effective alternative in place, we can and should work together to repair this program. Ignoring the long-term care crisis won't make it go away. Thank you.
Gentlelady's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from the District of Columbia seek recognition?
I rise to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, we have here one for the books. The Democrats offer a 100% private sector solution to the most costly health program affecting the Congress, or crisis affecting the Congress, and Republicans want to repeal it. This is going to go down in history. The Obama administration is a victim of its own honesty. It, in good faith, put the Class Act into the health care bill, knowing that we can't do without it. And then it looked carefully at the cost factors, and it did the right thing. It informed the Congress that it was suspending implementation of the Class Act. It certainly did not repeal it or ask for its repeal, nor should we, and here's why. The Medicare crisis before us as I speak is dwarfed by the long-term health care crisis. We know it because that crisis, the class crisis, if you will, is already here. Here's how. If a person must go into a nursing home, and those are the potential long-term people, Americans. If such Americans must go into a nursing home, first they spend down their resources, and then they go into a nursing home at a cost of about $80,000 a year. That, my friends, is long-term health care. Who pays for it? We pay for it. We, the taxpayers, because Medicaid pays for it. They're coming at an increasing clip because the fact is that the number of Americans who are living longer, who don't have the resources themselves, grows exponentially. Government is now paying 100%. Let's look at the Class Act. That was a 100% privately financed plan. It said that we should all ourselves not wait for long-term care to be needed where we would have to ask the government through Medicaid to pay for nursing home care. We should begin now to take care of our own long-term needs. What are you going to do if we don't have the Class Act pass off the elderly who are in the nursing homes? To where? To whom? Clearly, this is the only solution unless you want the federal government to continue to pick up care for, and mind you, for those who need long-term health care, and that is what people in nursing homes are there for. Only 8% buy long-term health care. Now, I bought long-term health care, and then I was a little concerned to read that people who have bought long-term health care find that they're not going to get what they thought they paid for. I think this House ought to be having hearings on what is out there now. If we want to encourage people to buy their own long-term health care, we are doing none of that. We are not encouraging people to do what the Class Act would encourage them to do. Instead, we're saying repeal this private sector solution. That makes no sense, because when the crisis comes, the elderly are going to come to us. They're going to say they have no long-term care. They want what the last generation had. You spend down your resources, and then Medicaid picks it up. That's the solution on the table now. If you want a private solution, this is golden. It is in law. We should grab it, keep it, have hearings on it. How can we make it feasible? Thank the administration for indeed deciding not to implement it. They had an alternative. They could have allowed it to lay dormant, gone on with the rest of the health care bill. Instead, they told the truth. Now we're here trying to repeal it, knowing full well that when the crisis is upon us, we will never be able to put forward a private, 100% private solution, because it will be too late. Take this for what it's worth. You have a bird in hand. And I thank the chair, the speaker.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For purposes, the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to strike the last words.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To summarize briefly, first of all, there is no class program. The lady was right. This is a women's issue. Women have been promised something that they'll never get with the Class Act. 0 people will be enrolled in the Class Act. They have a program that doesn't work. They know it won't work, and it's a false sense of hope to say that it will. HHS studied for 18 months, 8 different scenarios to fix the Class Act, from $391 a month premium to $3,000 a month premium. They concluded the same result. The Class Act is not fixable. Short of a mandate, there's no way to fix
the Class Act. Now, our friends on the other side have had several opportunities to offer amendments to fix the Class Act. First of all, H.R. 1173 was marked up in the Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee, and they didn't offer an amendment. At full committee, the Democrats didn't offer a comprehensive plan to fix the program. And now, with nearly 4 hours of debate, still no amendments to fix the program. Without amendment, without a mandate, there's no way to fix it. Mr. Chairman, we must get this program off the books and start over. It was wrong when it was passed. It's simply a liability on our budget, and the American taxpayers who would reject any further attempt by the federal government to require something upon them that is another mandate. I urge a vote for H.R. 1173 to repeal this Class Act. Let's start over again. I yield back.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in the Congressional Record on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 2 by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas. Amendment number 1 by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas. Amendment number 4 by Mr. Deutsch of Florida. Amendment number 5 by Mr. Deutsch of Florida. The Chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote for the first vote in the series. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on Amendment number 2, printed in the Congressional Record by the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
For the past several hours, the House has been debating a bill and amendments to a bill that would repeal the Class Act, part of the health care law, which provides long-term health care services. The Obama administration said back in October that it wouldn't implement that portion of the law due to a lack of funding. They wrap up and move forward with several amendment votes. The first one here, one of 2 amendments by Sheila Jackson Lee that'll get a vote. This first vote is 15 minutes. Also in Washington today, or just outside Washington, President Obama outlined a plan to help homeowners who are underwater on their mortgages still take advantage of low interest rates and refinance their loans. We're going to show you the President's comments from this morning during this first 15-minute vote.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Hey. Thank you. Thank you so much. Everybody, please have a seat. Have a seat. It is great to be back in Falls Church. Thank you for having me. You know, last week, in my State of the Union, I laid out my blueprint for an economy that's built to last. And I want to assure you I am not going to go over the whole thing again this morning. That was a long speech. I'm not going to repeat the whole thing. But I do want to talk about some of the issues that I discussed last week, because the blueprint we put forward was one that focuses on restoring what have always been this country's greatest strengths: American manufacturing, American energy, skills and education for American workers so that we can compete with anybody around the world in this 21st century economy. And most importantly, the American values of fairness and responsibility. Fairness and responsibility. Now, we know what happens because we've just seen it, what happened when we stray from those values. We saw what happened over the past decade when we strayed from those values, especially when it comes to the massive housing bubble that burst and hurt so many people. Millions of families who did the right and the responsible thing. Folks who shopped for a home that they could afford, secured a mortgage, made their payments each month. They were hurt badly by the irresponsible actions of other people who weren't playing by the same rules, weren't taking the same care, weren't acting as responsibly. By lenders who sold loans to people who they knew couldn't afford the mortgages, and buyers who bought homes they knew they couldn't afford, and banks that packaged those mortgages up and traded them to reap phantom profits, knowing that they were building a house of cards. It was wrong. It was wrong. It triggered the worst economic crisis of our lifetimes. And it has been the single biggest drag on our recovery from a terrible recession. You know, crushing debt has kept millions of consumers from spending. A lack of building demand has kept hundreds of thousands of construction workers idle. Everybody involved in the home building business, folks who make windows, folks who make carpets, they've all been impacted. The challenge is massive in size and in scope because we've got a multi-trillion-dollar housing industry. And economists can tell you how it's affected all sorts of statistics, from GDP to consumer confidence. But what's at stake is more than just statistics. It's personal. Now, I've been saying that this is a make-or-break moment for the middle class, and this housing crisis struck right at the heart of what it means to be middle class in America, our homes, the place where we invest our nest egg, the place where we raise our family, the place where we plant roots in a community, the place where we build memories. It's personal. It affects so much of how people feel about their lives, about their communities, about the country, about the economy. We need to do everything in our power to repair the damage and make responsible families whole again. Everything we can. Now, the truth is, it's going to take more time than any of us would like for the housing market to fully recover from this crisis. This was a big bubble. And when it burst, it had a big effect. Home prices started a pretty steady decline about 5 years ago. And government certainly can't fix the entire problem on its own. But it is wrong for anybody to suggest that the only option for struggling, responsible homeowners is to sit and wait for the housing market to hit bottom. I refuse to accept that, and so do the American people. There are more than 10 million homeowners across the country right now who, because of an unprecedented decline in home prices that is no fault of their own, owe more on their mortgage than their homes are worth. Means your mortgage, your house is underwater. Here in Falls Church, home values have fallen by about a quarter from their peak. In places like Las Vegas, more than half of all homeowners are underwater. More than half. So it's going to take a while for those prices to rise again. But there are actions we can take right now to provide some relief to folks who've been responsible, have done the right thing, and are making their payments on time. Already, thanks to the outstanding work in part of my Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Sean Donovan, who's here today. Yeah, there he is, a good-looking guy in the front here. The housing plan we launched a couple of years ago has helped nearly 1 million responsible homeowners refinance their mortgages, and they're saving an average of $300 on their payments each month. $300, which is great. But I'll be honest, the programs that we put forward haven't worked at the scale that we hoped. Not as many people have taken advantage of it as we wanted. Mortgage rates are as low as they've been in half a century. And when that happens, usually homeowners flock to refinance their mortgages. So a lot of people take advantage of it and save a lot of money. But this time, too many families haven't been able to take advantage of the low rates because falling prices locked them out of the market. They were underwater, made it more difficult for them to refinance. Then you've got all the fees involved in refinancing. And a lot of people just said, you know what, even though I'd like to be obviously cutting down my monthly payment, the banks just aren't being real encouraging. So last year we took aggressive action that allowed more families to participate. And today we're doing even more. This is the main reason I'm here today. As I indicated at the State of the Union last week, I am sending Congress a plan that will give every responsible homeowner in America the chance to save about $3,000 a year on their mortgage by refinancing at historically low rates. No more red tape. No more runaround from the banks. And a small fee on the largest financial institutions will make sure it doesn't add to our deficit. Now, I want to be clear, this plan, like the other actions we've taken, will not help the neighbors down the street who bought a house they couldn't afford and then walked away and left a foreclosed home behind. It's not designed for those who've acted irresponsibly, but it can help those who've acted responsibly. It's not going to help those who bought multiple homes just to speculate and flip the house and make a quick buck, but it can help those who've acted responsibly. What this plan will do is help millions of responsible homeowners who make their payments on time but find themselves trapped under falling home values or wrapped up in red tape. If you're ineligible for refinancing just because you're underwater on your mortgage, through no fault of your own, this plan changes that. You'll be able to refinance at a lower rate. You'll be able to save hundreds of dollars a month that you can put back in your pocket. Or you can choose those savings to rebuild equity in your homes, which will help most underwater homeowners come back up for air more quickly. Now, to move this part of my plan, we're going to need Congress to act. We're going to need Congress to act. I hear some murmuring in the audience here. We need them to act. But we're not just going to wait for Congress. We're going to keep building a firewall to prevent the same kinds of abuses that led to this crisis in the first place. So there are things we can do administratively that are also going to help responsible homeowners. Already we've set up a special task force I asked my Attorney General to establish to investigate the kind of activity banks took when they packaged and sold risky mortgages. And that task force is ramping up its work as we speak. We're going to keep at it and hold people who broke the law accountable and help restore confidence in the market. We're going to speed assistance to homeowners. And we're going to turn the page on an era of recklessness that hurt so many hard-working Americans. Today, I'm also proposing a homeowner's Bill of Rights. One straightforward set of common-sense rules of the road that every family knows they can count on when they're shopping for a mortgage. No more hidden fees or conflicts of interest. No more getting the runaround when you call about your loan. No more fine print that you use to get families to take a deal that is not as good as the one they should have gotten. New safeguards against inappropriate foreclosures. New options to avoid foreclosure if you've fallen on hardship or a run of bad luck. And a new, simple, clear form for new buyers of a home. Now, think about it. This is the most important purchase a family makes. But how many of you have had to deal with overly complicated mortgage forms and hidden clauses and complex terms? I remember when Michelle and I bought our first condo. And we were both lawyers. And we're looking through the forms and we're kind of holding it out, reading it again. What does this phrase mean? And that's, you know, for two trained lawyers. The forms, the confusion, the potential for abuse is too great, just because the forms were too complicated. So this is what a mortgage form should look like. This is it. Now that our new consumer watchdog agency is finally running at full steam, now that Richard Cordray is in as the director of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, they're moving forward on important protections like this new, shorter mortgage form. Simple, not complicated. Informative, not confusing. Terms are clear. Fees are transparent. This, by the way, is what some of the folks in Congress are trying to roll back and prevent from happening. I guess they like complicated things that confuse consumers and allow them to be cheated. I prefer actions that are taken to make things simpler and easier to understand for consumers so that they can get the best deal possible, especially on the biggest single investment that most people will ever make. Americans making a down payment on their dreams shouldn't be terrified by pages and pages of fine print. They should be confident they're making the right decision for their future. Now, there's more that we're announcing today. We're working to turn more foreclosed homes into rental housing because, as we know, and a lot of families know, that empty house or for sale sign down the block can bring down the price of homes across the neighborhood. We're working to make sure people don't lose their homes just because they lose their jobs. These are steps that can make a concrete difference in people's lives right now. As I said earlier, no program or policy will solve all the problems in a multi-trillion-dollar housing market. The heights of the housing bubble reached before it burst, those were unsustainable. And it's going to take time to fully recover. That requires everybody to do their part. As much as our economic challenges were born of eroding home values and portfolio values, they were also born of an erosion of some old-fashioned American values. An economy that's built to last, that's on a firm foundation so that middle-class families have a sense of security, and those who want to get in the middle class can make it if they're working hard. That demands responsibility from everyone. Government must take responsibility for rules that are fair and fairly enforced. Banks and lenders must be held accountable for ending the practices that helped cause this crisis in the first place. And all of us have to take responsibility for our own actions, or lack of action. So I urge Congress to act, pass this plan, help more families keep their homes, help more neighborhoods remain vibrant, help keep more dreams defended and alive. And I promise you that I'll keep doing everything I can to make the future brighter for this community, for this Commonwealth, for this country. Thank you, everybody. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Before the President's announcement today, the Wall Street Journal wrote that the proposal, which the President mentioned in his State of the Union address, is likely to spur debate over how aggressive the government should intervene in the housing market. Also at issue, how to fund the effort, estimated $5 billion to $10 billion price tag. That from the Wall Street Journal. Back live on the House floor, the first of 4 amendment votes to a bill that would repeal the Class Act. That's part of the health care law that provides long-term health care services. This first amendment, 15 minutes, and it's amendment proposed by Democrat Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas. It would prevent the repeal of the class program until the Secretary of Health and Human Services certifies to Congress that at least 60% of the individuals in the U.S. who are 25 years or older have long-term care insurance. A 15-minute vote. As you can see, it's winding down, and 3 amendment votes to follow. Those will be 2-minute votes.
263. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on Amendment Number 1, printed in the Congressional Record by the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will read